Welcome to the MCU Body Count, where we tally up the victims of all our favorite Marvel heroes. I'm Vera Wild, and today we'll be tallying the victims of Captain America, who made his first debut in December of 1940, even though the cover date on that first issue says March 1941. The character was created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby for Timely Comics, which would later down the line be renamed to Marvel Comics in the 1960s. The cover features an iconic image of Cap punching Hitler directly into the face, and it's really important to realize what a statement this was at the time. When this comic first hit shelves, the USA was not yet involved in the war, and there were in fact strong movements within the country to stay out of it. So for a hero clad in the colors of the American flag to be depicted punching a foreign leader who we were not at war with at the time, and in fact showing him doing that a full year ahead of the bombing of Pearl Harbor, which finally prompted American involvement, that was a bold move for Simon, Kirby, and Timely Comics to make. Captain America is also known as Steve Rogers, a good-hearted embodiment of everything that this country strives to be, bulked up by the so-called super soldier serum, which is lost after being used on him due to the assassination of the man who invented it. Steve fought in World War II, naturally, but towards the end of that war, found himself frozen in ice, only to later be revived decades later. This is actually a retcon of sorts. You see, after the war ended, the popularity of superheroes declined across the board, with all but the biggest names like Superman or Batman eventually seeing their books canceled. This happened to Captain America as well, whose comic ended in 1949. Atlas Comics, which was what the publisher was called after Timely but before Marvel, attempted to revive the character in the 1950s as Captain America, Commie Smasher. That didn't last very long, but it did mean that when the character came back for good in 1964, at the now rechristened Marvel Comics, Jack Kirby and Stan Lee decided to retcon Commie Smasher Cap as an imposter and came up with the frozen in ice gimmick, cementing part of his role in the comics universe being that of a man out of time. Captain America has never gone away since, though his popularity hasn't always been consistent. A poorly aged cartoon, multiple attempts at TV series, and a very boring low-budget movie probably didn't help in that regard. But you know what did? 2011's Captain America, the First Avenger, the last of the origin stories for the Marvel Cinematic Universe before the big genre-defining mega smash that was the Avengers. Portrayed to near perfection by Chris Evans, Captain America appears prominently in 7 films before the character was retired at the conclusion of Avengers Endgame. I should have actually noted this back in the Iron Man video. While I am going to be taking Disney Plus shows into account for some of the characters I intend to do with this series, I will not be including anything from the What If series, since I don't see any reason why main universe Steve should get credits for the actions of his variants. The multiverse, it just really complicates these things. Anyways, Captain America is stalwart, noble, at times stubborn to a fault, and refuses to compromise his ideals. However, as a war veteran who saw active combat, those ideals don't include anything like a no-kill rule. That being said, Steve's weapon of choice is one of the least lethal items in the MCU, his vibranium shield. Able to absorb impacts, vibrations, and nearly indestructible, the shield is used both offensively and defensively, frequently being thrown in a manner that would be physics-defying if it wasn't made of a fictional material with really vague properties.
That thing does not obey the laws of physics at all.
When Captain America isn't throwing his mighty shield, he's skilled in hand-to-hand combat, boosted by his enhanced strength and endurance from the super soldier serum. While Steve doesn't really have any qualms about picking up a gun and appears quite handy with them when he does, it's pretty rare for him to be equipped with one as standard issue after he's off of the wartime front. So with that in mind, how many people does Cap kill in his time wielding the shield? But before we get to that, a quick reminder in case you skipped the Iron Man video, I'm only going to be counting deaths of people who can be labeled as sentient and or sapient, and while that does not preclude non-humans from being counted, it does mean that I don't count anything that behaves as a horde or a hive mind. These kind of groups would include the Ultron bots, those multi-limbed beasties that bulk out Thanos' army, and of course, the Chitauri from the first Avengers movie. I made my case for considering them a hive mind back in the Iron Man video, so if you're tempted to fight me on this point, you can check out that and see my full explanation as to why I ultimately made the call that I did. Beyond that, I am operating largely on my own instincts as to whether something appears to be lethal or not. And I largely am going to base that off of the nature of the damage, the sound effects used. I am rapidly developing an ear for bone-crunching sound effects. And also the general tropes of the genre. At no point am I doing a realistic assessment of physical damage. I'm not a doctor. These injuries are never presented realistically in these kinds of films anyway, and that's just not how we're approaching this. All on the same page? Good. Let's count the bodies. In his first outing, Steve was serving militarily in war, so you'd expect him to rack up a decent number once he's all juiced up and out in the field. Well, initially, when he is out trying to free prisoners from Hydra, he appears to be going non-lethal, beating up and, by all indication, knocking out 2 soldiers in a truck and 1 more upon arrival at the base. Another knockout once inside, and then 1 more before freeing the prisoners, and it's starting to look like Cap might be going for the no-kill run on this mission. Later, he does kick a guy over a railing, but it's kind of hard to tell how far that guy fell and whether or not he landed on anything that would have killed him, and the general layout of the area is such that I'm not inclined to count it. Now, granted, that guy almost definitely dies later when the munitions are detonated, but that's Red Skull who sets the charges, so Steve doesn't get credit for that. Later on, we see the good captain breaking down a door, guns blazing, but we never see a reverse angle, so who knows if he hit anything or what he was even shooting at. We get a montage of shield hits and explosions, but nothing that I could comfortably confirm as a kill. However, at the tail end of the montage, we do have the detonation of this mega tank. Initially, he throws a guy off. I'm not counting that as fatal. It's not high enough. However, he then drops in explosives and the whole thing goes boom. In the Iron Man body count, I went over the fact that the standard crew in a tank is 4, but that was for modern day tanks. World War II tanks could be up to 6, and that's for just a standard crew. For this beast, I'm going to say it's more than that. So here's how I'm figuring this. The standard crew of 6 plus 1 more for each placement of guns, because I'm assuming every gun is intended to be operated simultaneously while in motion. So there is the big gun up top, a set of Hydra lasers underneath that, and a pair of guns on either side. Since the lasers have their own power source, and the side guns just look like they're high caliber, but otherwise standard weaponry, I'm going to be assuming that it's only the big cannon that requires a dedicated loader in addition to the gunner. So the 3 others should only need 1 gunner apiece, with no loaders required. So with our standard crew of 6, which would include the loader for the big gun, plus 1 for each of the 3 gun turrets, minus the 1 guy who gets thrown out by Steve when he opened up the tank, gives us a count of 8 for this explosion. The tank is big enough that it could have had more people than that in it, but this is the number I'm comfortable with. After that, there's the raid on the train where Cap eventually loses Bucky, for the time being. Steve takes down a big boy with a blaster, and it looks more like a knockout to me. Now, Cap does give an assist to Bucky with his kills, but I'm not counting those towards his score. And I can confirm the big guy was only knocked out because he shows up again and causes the train to tear open. Cap hits him with the shield, but I'm counting that as another knockout, if for no other reason than Cap's too busy trying to save Bucky to make sure the guy stays down, which means no kills on this little action scene. But now it's time for some motorcycle action. Let's see if Steve is willing to get his hands dirty here. A couple of Hydra agents get clotheslined off their bikes, which doesn't look pleasant, but I'm not going to count that as fatal. But then Cap busts out a rear-firing flamethrower. Guy goes down, completely engulfed in flames. That one's going to get counted. Another flips off the bike, and you know what? Initially, I wasn't going to count this one because we don't see how he lands. But here's the thing. He gets the classic Wilhelm scream. And that scream is used almost exclusively on characters who are never getting back up again. So what the heck? I'll give it to him. I will also count these two that Cap just blows up all casual-like. He then blows up a tank with rockets. Now, it's a normal tank, not a mega tank, and it's big enough that I'm going to assume the upper end of crew sizes for the time, which, as I mentioned, would be 6. When Captain America infiltrates the base, there's an explosion and one Hydra agent goes down. There's another guy who flails and drops down, but I can't for the life of me tell what hit him. There's a laser blast, like, in the shot, but it's nowhere near the guy. I think he's just a drama queen. We get some shield smacks, another explosion, but it doesn't feel close enough to anybody for me to feel comfortable counting it as a kill for any of them. And that scene gets wrapped up as Steve gets surrounded. It's not too long after that backup arrives. Cap puts a Hydra agent between himself and the Red Skull. The guy gets blasted, and with every indication that Cap intentionally used him as a human shield. So yeah, I'll count that one even though it was Red Skull who pulled the trigger. From here, most kills are going to go to the soldiers who come in blazing. There's a few more knockdowns and punches, but the real action for what's left in this movie comes on the Red Skull's getaway plane. Inside of it, Steve takes on several goons. The first few look like knockouts, but then he takes one out with a knife, causes a situation that makes one of them drop from the plane and flat out throws another one off. So that's 3 right there. When Steve finds himself fighting a Hydra agent on a mini-plane, the agent does ultimately fall into the propellers, but that's honestly more due to the flying of the pilot trying to shake Steve off, so I'm not going to give Cap that one. Steve does eject the pilot of that plane, but given that the plane even had an eject feature, I feel like it's safe to assume that there were means for the pilot to land safely. Parachute, something. But then again, by this time they'd be over the ocean. He's just going to end up way too far from land. He's going to drown. So, you know what? Heck, I'll give that one to him. After that, it's just Cap versus the Red Skull, and we know from later movies that whatever happened to good old Johann Schmidt, it didn't properly kill him, so that wraps up Captain America's debut film. After that, it's the big team-up with the Avengers. But as I alluded to and went over in the Iron Man body count video, the Chitauri act as a hive mind, as evidenced by all of them dropping when the mothership blows up, and I do not count parts of a hive mind as individual kills. So that means the only kill Cap gets in this entire big team-up movie is throwing this guy off the helicarrier. This guy, who was under mind control from Loki and was probably a decent sort otherwise. Might have even had a family with a new puppy and everything. Nice one, Steve. Real nice. On the Captain's next solo outing, The Winter Soldier, the first action scene has Steve, Natasha, aka Black Widow, and a few others taking on pirates on an anchored boat. Cap goes for chokehold and shield smashes for most of the goons on deck, which I'm still going to count as non-lethal knockouts. Now, there is this guy who goes overboard, and I went back and forth on him. If the ship had been in motion, I'd have assumed he got left behind and drowned, but with it being anchored, it's possible he could still get back on board. Except there's some crunchy sound effects in play here. So I feel like his legs might have been broken on impact with the railing. I think I'm going to call this one drowned. Another guy goes over the railing, but not nearly as violently, so he's probably okay. And then the rest of the on-deck hits are just knockouts. Later on, there's this shield throw that Batroc ducks, and it hits this other guy in the head before embedding in the wall. And given how hard that was thrown, and the fact that it was definitely a headshot, I'm saying this guy's dead. Yeah, I know, there should be blood on the shield, and there isn't, but I don't care. Look at this hit. Normally when thrown, the shield bounces off guys. This went right through him. He's gone. There's the one-on-one fight with Batroc, but no deaths there, so let's move on to our next action beat. Well, the next one that involves Steve. Anyway, badass as Nick Fury's car chase is, he's not in my current plans for this series. Sorry, Nick. So that then brings us to the elevator fight. Also pretty dang badass. It's also all knockouts, and also no kills during Cap's subsequent escape because the plane he takes down lands surprisingly softly, all things considered. During the shootout on the street with Hydra, Steve deliberately deflects bullet fire to ricochet and take out a Hydra agent, but otherwise he's playing defense on this one. From there, we can jump to the finale, with the helicarrier launch and the Hydra versus S.H.I.E.L.D. battle. It's mostly knockout hits through this, though Cap does set off this grenade that initially I was going to say wasn't close enough to these guys to take them out, but on closer inspection, that's really right in their faces, so that's 3 right there. But after that, it's knockouts with some impressive leg work, but nothing fatal. So, we move on. Time for the next team up. Anyone who already watched the Iron Man body count already knows what a massive pain in the ass the opening action scene of Age of Ultron was. It's especially difficult with a character like Cap, whose weapon may be the single most capable of being used non-lethally out of the entire team. And because this action scene is framed around a forward assault on the Hydra base and everything is propelling forward, the need for both the team and the action to keep moving means I can't get a reference for how hard a lot of these guys went down, whether or not it looked like they would ever get back up. So, yeah, gonna be a lot of judgment calls on this one. And due to all that, I expect this is a section I'm more liable to get some disagreement on, but here we go. Cap rides into the scene on a motorcycle and starts by grabbing this guy by the leg, and then proceeding to drag him along the ground before hurling him at his buddies. And I agonized on this one a little bit, because that is a rough bit of treatment. But we know the Hydra agent didn't take a lethal or even knockout damage from being dragged along because he yells once he's airborne. And as a general rule in action scenes, one villain thrown into others is usually treated as a knockdown. So I won't be counting the guy thrown or the 2 guys he landed on. Next up, Steve takes out a few in rapid succession with the shield and knocks this guy over a ledge. Now, it's feasible that that fall might be fatal. However, given that Steve didn't have a big drop when he jumps his motorcycle down shortly after, I'm assuming that the Hydra agent fell from a comparable height, and so I'm going to say that's survivable. There's a shield backhand that I almost missed, but again, nothing about it looks any harder than what I've been considering knockout blows so far in this video. After that, we've got the Star-Spangled Avenger throwing his motorcycle at a Jeep and causing it to flip over. Now, I spotted 4 guys riding in this thing, but one of them must have realized what was about to happen because he's actually already trying to leap out of the Jeep when the motorcycle impacts. Without being able to see how he lands, I'm not prepared to confirm that guy as a kill. That leaves the 3 still in the Jeep. Now, I did notice that it doesn't land in a way that actually puts them on their heads because it kind of spins slightly, lands on its side. Now that leaves me a little bit of wiggle room. But given the impact of the motorcycle, I'm definitely going to call the 2 in the front as dead, even though the actual direct impact was not on either one of their sides, but actually dead in between them. But the speed at which this thing hits, I'm still going to err on the side of saying that the 3rd guy didn't make it either. So that's 3 more for Steve. A little later, we see him go hand to hand with some goons, and while I won't count any of these as kills, there's a moment I want to highlight anyway, just to give something close to hard evidence that most of the time, a shield throw is non-fatal. You can see here, Cap bounces the shield off of the heads of several of these guys, and then has to deck this one a second time because he's still standing. That, to me, is a good, solid case that unless there is something significantly different about a throw, as was noted with the Winter Soldier embedded in the wall throw, barring something like that, I'm comfortable calling shield hits as knockouts by default. Then we have this combo move with Thor and Cap, and this one could have gone a few ways. Now, first off, I suspect some would argue for this force wave as being non-lethal, since it mostly appears to just be knocking guys aside, but the thing is, that same wave rips the top of a tank off at a point when it should be losing energy, and that kind of force, I'm calling that lethal. Yes, it would have been more consistent for the Hydra thugs to be shredded by that, but you know, PG-13... Same reason there was no blood on the shield when Cap took the guy out on the boat. But now as then, because the demonstrated force is so destructive, I'm calling it lethal anyways. But the problem then becomes, who do I give credit for this? Because the blow originates from Thor, and that blow gets enhanced and directed by the shield. But the shield is being used mostly just to direct it and to channel some of the power from the hammer. I did consider splitting the count, giving half to each of them, but Ultimately, I think what makes this legal is rooted more in Thor's contribution than Cap's. So you're actually going to have to wait for the Thor video to find out how many were taken out there. Steve then confronts Strucker non-lethally, and that wraps up this opening stretch of action. As for the back end of the film, I've established before the Ultron bots I consider to be non-sentient and a horde, so they are not going to be counted. However, there is one other action scene that does involve people, and that's the one on the tanker where some of Claw's minions get involved. Cap spends most of that fight dealing with an Ultron bot, and the shield hits and throws we do see don't look hard enough to count as fatal. And then at that point, he gets whammied by Wanda, so he's out for the remainder of that fight. And the rest of the movie from there on out is Ultron and Ultron bots, so we'll move on from here. Now, for Civil War, while the airport fight is all heroes, nobody dies, in the opening confrontation with some of the remnants of Hydra and led by Crossbones, there's some action here. Steve comes in hard with this first hit. I wouldn't normally count a body slam as fatal, but Cap came in from the air and slammed full force into this guy. Shield first. He might as well have slammed a car into him. I really want to call him dead, but we then get confirmation that these guys are in body armor.
Body armor? AR-15s.
Which in real life would not have saved him from an impact like that, but we're also going by movie logic, so okay, yeah, fine, he lives. Bet you he never walks a straight line again, but fine. There are a few kills in that opening sequence, but they go to Sam, who I don't plan to do unless this series does well enough for me to cover Phase 2. Now, as for Crossbones, while he does go down following a confrontation with Cap, that is from self-detonation. And that'll do it for Civil War. So, because of my not counting mindless hordes, the good old Star-Spangled Superhero actually doesn't land a single kill in either Infinity War or Endgame. Dang, Cap. Why you gotta be so lazy? Obviously, I'm joking. The man works his ass off, but all of the named characters or ones with confirmed mental autonomy get taken out by other combatants or by Tony's final sacrificial snap. So that actually means Cap goes through his final 3 films only punching the tickets of monsters and horde beasts. And so we're done. And we need to now take a look at the final numbers. In his time as Captain America, Steve Rogers racked up a total of 34 kills, and like Iron Man before him, the vast majority of those were in his first appearance. With significant appearances in 7 films, that gives Steve an average body count of 4.86 kills per movie. This is well behind Iron Man, who had a total of 82 kills and an average of 9.11 kills per movie. Looking at a breakdown, the vast majority of bodies left behind by Captain America were done in by some form of explosion, with the second most common cause involving some sort of fall from a significant height. The rest are a smattering of blunt force trauma, bullet ricochet, putting someone between himself and harm, and that one time that Cap used the shield itself to kill somebody. Unlike Tony though, Steve didn't take out any sentient non-humans, so all of his kills were just normal, squishy people. None of them even had any superhero enhancements. So the super soldier serum powered hero only ever killed guys who were nowhere near his level of skill and strength. Geez, when I say it like that, it almost makes Cap seem like a bully. I'm kidding. Again, of course, being a bully just isn't about physical strength. It's a mentality of picking on the weak and the vulnerable for selfish reasons. And Captain America proved again and again that is absolutely not who he is, and he wouldn't stand for that behavior when he saw it.
The last time I was in Germany and saw a man standing above everybody else, we ended up disagreeing.
So, that'll wrap up this entry in the MCU body count. Come back in 2 months where I will go from the Avenger with the least lethal weapon of choice to the one who might well have the most lethal go-to weapon, as we take a look at the bodies left behind by Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye. With 5 movies and a series to go through, can Hawkeye challenge the likes of Steve or Tony, who both had more appearances than he did? Find out in November. And that will wrap up this one. What did you think of this? Was it higher than you thought? Was it lower? Were you surprised that I did or didn't count certain things? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments and let's talk about it. If you think I made a mistake, that's a good place to put that too. But if you want to support this series or anything else I do, Patreon's the best way to do it. and I absolutely appreciate every single bit of support I get through that, but don't worry too much about it. Like, share, subscribe, help me in the algorithm as well, so I definitely appreciate those. But what I really want you to remember is you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You're the council, I'm just running the meetings, and in the case of this series, counting up the bodies. And until next time, this council is adjourned. Time to give my thanks to my highest supporting patrons. That would include Robin Moore, Zubin Lutfullah, Tarak, the thing that goes doink in the anime, Oliver B., Melinda Walters, Emu Delkey, Theotha Boyd, Becky Sparks, Fernabi Likes the Poodle, Zach, Idolin, Tracy Scrabbit, Angry Casperl, Adam RDL Taylor, Shane Ross, Shayla Gourlay, Brendan LaRose, and TT. If you want your name said while these guys try and distract me, consider looking at the rewards on my Patreon.